Hello, this is Gordon McRae. Welcome to the Humanity Podcast, the regular audio update from Humanist Society Scotland.
This episode was recorded at our What Is Humanism event with humanist author Annemarie Young.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. For those of you who don't know about the Scottish Humanist Society, we are the national charity for humanists in Scotland, and we seek to represent the views of people in Scotland who wish to live ethical, fulfilling, compassionate lives guided by empathy, reason, that sort of thing. So we do this in two distinct ways. One is through providing humanist ceremonies to people who want to recognise life's milestones in a way that's meaningful for them, and the other is through our policy and campaign work. Now, over the past year, we've had a huge focus on education. We launched our Enlighten Up campaign, which is calling for an end to unelected religious representatives on local education committees. And if you'd like some more information about that, we've got leaflets and petition sheets at the back. We launched a free guide to non-religious parents and guardians, and also non-religious young people, to explain their rights on religion within education. And most recently, we've also started legal action against the Scottish Government's decision not to extend the provision to opt out of religious observance to young people. And if you've been monitoring our progress on that, you will see, of course, that we've reached an agreement with the government to pause that while they undertake a consultation into updating their guidance to head teachers. So that's some really good news that we've had from our education work there. And of course, last year we were very happy to join forces with the BHA to fundraise to send this book to every school within the UK. So this book, What is Humanism? How do you live without God? And Other Big Questions, was co-written by Michael Rosen, I should say, and Annemarie Young. So before I babble on any more about what I'm doing, I'm going to sit down and have a lovely chat with Annemarie about this here. So, to start off, can you just tell us a little bit about the book and sort of how it came to be, how it came about?
How it came to be? About 4 years ago, I was in contact with Michael Rosen. I was commissioning some books for another publisher, and I asked him to send me some ideas. He sent me 3. The other publishers wanted the one on poetry, and one of the ideas was a book about secularism. That's all he said. And I said to him, I would love to do that book. And he said, right, let's do it together. So I went out and searched for publishers, and it took a couple of years, and then we found Wayland, who have published this book. It did coincide with the religious education curriculum for England and Wales, adding something to the effect that other worldviews, including humanism, or such as humanism, needed to be included in the RE curriculum. So that was a very good reason for them to say, right, we will publish this. They've got behind it very well, and the campaign is to send a copy to, I think it's all primary schools in the UK, but hopefully if they can raise a bit more money, then it can go to secondaries as well. It's aimed at 10 to 14-year-olds. We were very keen, both of us, as humanists, to explain what it is, but more to get children to question, to get children to think for themselves. That's what the book is about. It's getting them to think for themselves.
Yeah. And obviously, whenever we've been talking about this, whenever we've written anything about it, we've always talked about, you know, how important the book is, how interesting, insightful, and important it is. Why do you think it's important?
Right. I think this follows on from what I said about questioning, and in particular, in the current political climate, both in this country, in the UK, in Europe, and in the US now. It's vitally important that we counter prejudice before it takes hold. And if you get children and young people to start questioning as they are children, to think for themselves and to ask questions of others and of themselves, and not just to believe what they are told, a lot of it having been lies in the recent few months, that's really what drives me and the work that I do, and Michael as well. You can tell from his poetry as well. And just to mention that I have written with my husband, who's over there, a series of books called The Refugee Diaries, which are all about getting real children's stories about real children, getting them out there so children can see what a refugee really is all about, what these real children are. And Michael and I have also just published a book called Who Are Refugees and Migrants? It's in the same format as this. Why do people leave their homes, and other big questions. So it's all in that vein. So especially with, as I said, the current political climate, with the populism that celebrates xenophobia, racism, jingoism, and entrenching views of the other. So we always are allowed with this rhetoric to think of the other, whoever they might be, as being bad and problematic. So if we can get children to just ask questions and always be questioning, not only of other people but of themselves, that's why I think this book is important, because throughout the book we do not tell children, our readers, what to think. We encourage them to ask questions. And that's what it's all about.
And that's one of the things that I think is really great about it, is that throughout the whole book you've got the questions, you've got kind of subjects that you encourage them to think about.
Yeah.
So
and they're called think about.
Yes. Yeah.
So we refer to them as think abouts.
So it's kind of interactive in a way, the way it's put together, which I think is really nice.
Yeah.
With regards to the current political climate, which I feel like we can't really not mention now, one section of the book that I think is really great is the statement of values. In education and the community.
Yes.
Which, as you explained here, was put together by a forum set up by the UK government.
Yes, it was a forum set up. It was the questionnaire was not sent to Scotland, unfortunately. It was because it was to do with the curriculum and the England and Wales. It was sent out to 3,000 individuals and schools. A statement that was put together. It took something like 3-4 years, under the aegis of Marianne Talbot, who's a philosopher at Oxford, and she works on philosophy for children, which is really fantastic.
As soon as you say it was put together, it's a secular statement which is divided into 4 sections. You've got the self, relationships, society, and the environment. Yeah. And it includes statements such as resolve disputes peacefully and respect religious and cultural diversity. And I think it is probably fair to say, on a wider scale, when we look at the world, we don't live in a world where that is necessarily, those values are necessarily upheld all the time.
The values are to aspire to.
So it can be quite difficult to to teach children those values when, there are so many examples to the contrary that are leaders, that people are committing every day. So how often do you find yourself referring to these values, in particular with your other work? So, for example, with Refugee Diaries,
without actually looking at these, when I did look at them again, yes, they underpin everything, actually. So I think they are really important. There's the self and relationships, and then society as a whole list, and the environment. Refuse to support values or actions that may be harmful to individuals or communities. Respect the rule of law and encourage others to do so. Respect religious and cultural diversity. So they're all there, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
So it's sort of an indirect referral to it in many ways. So you don't necessarily
Well, with the new book, yes, one of the things that underpins the new book is here we've got this statement of values. In the Refugees and Migrants book, we take an extract from the preamble of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and it's all there. So, that's where these came from as well. These are slightly more worked out, and these are in much friendlier terms and much more accessible to children. The UN Declaration of Human Rights is less so, but we've pulled out the sentences from there that do make sense, and it is all there, and that was ratified by all the countries that came together for the UN. So the values are there, and the values have been agreed by the vast majority of people, but as you say, they are not to be found realised in very many places.
You're very open in this book about the fact that your parents weren't religious, but as a child you did attend a Catholic school, and that is presumably what led to you being religious in your early life, which
Yes.
you write about in here. Was that a difficult dynamic to maintain kind of between your home and school?
What was really difficult was that my parents were immigrants from Egypt to Australia, and where we lived, the schools were quite difficult. I was very obviously foreign, they were very obviously foreign. There was quite a lot of anti-foreign bullying amongst children, and they decided to send me to a Catholic school because they knew about that. My mother, in fact, had spent 12 years as a boarder in a Catholic convent, and she was spiritual rather than religious. She did believe in God, but she didn't go to church, she didn't go to Mass on Sundays. My father had been to a Catholic school. He'd become an atheist at the age of 14 when he ingenuously asked a priest, he was an altar boy, he asked the priest, I've been thinking, and if God is omnipotent, all knowing and all powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world? And he was given a beating and told not to ask that again. So that was it. As far as my father was concerned, he became an atheist. And he told, I knew this story, but, that's fine. My father was an atheist. My mother believed in God. She had a spiritual life. They sent me to this Catholic school, and of course, it was all, there was a lot of religion, and we went to Mass, and I took all of that in. And it was fine. They did not tell me not to believe. Where there was tension was, I remember very, very clearly, and I've said this here, coming home one night, I was about 6 or 7, and I was crying, and I said to my mother, look, you are going to go to hell because you and Dad don't go to church on Sundays. You don't go to Mass on Sundays. It's a mortal sin. You will go to hell. Please just go to church. That's all you have to do. It doesn't matter whether you believe or not, just go to church. And my mother, who was a wonderful, wise woman, she said, no, listen, think about this. God, whatever, is not like that. Not the God I believe in. It's ridiculous. She said, are we bad people? Do we do bad things? No, of course not. We won't go to hell. Don't worry, it won't happen. And so, I still feared for them. But she was very good, and my father didn't argue either with me. He didn't. So it was. That wasn't a problem, but I had that in my mind that my parents weren't bad people. We disagreed on all sorts of things, but then, and I actually got very religious at one point, and I went to Mass every day for several months. And my mother was wonderful. She, didn't tell me not to go, and then I stopped doing that. I was going to be a saint, so I really bought into it. But then, age 16, I started to think for myself. The Vietnam War was raging, and there was, it was Vatican II, and there was stuff about contraception and women and women's role, and I thought, wait a minute, I need to rethink this. And so that was it as far as I was concerned. So, yeah, I think it's interesting if one has had a religious background. it makes it even stronger, actually, if you question it.
Mm. Did you find it quite hard when you did start to question that belief? Did you kind of struggle with it?
No, I didn't. No, I think because I came through it. I came through it very quickly, and it didn't. It was like a switch, actually. I just switched from believing everything, or it can't have been. It must have happened over a couple of years, I think, between the ages of 14 and 16, and it gradually fell away. And then I started to really think this is not right. This is not what I believe.
And you realised it's okay to change your mind.
Exactly.
You talk about so well here.
Another thing we say to children: you can change your mind. You can change your mind all through your life. You don't have to keep believing things that you believed when you were younger, or the things that you believe in your middle age. Keep questioning is the main thing.
So you talk quite a lot about how you believe in the power of books to open readers' minds and overcome prejudice.
Yes.
And so that would be why your books tend to tackle some fairly big issues. So obviously you've got the refugee crisis, for example. That's a fairly big one. Probably the biggest question in this book is, what is the purpose of life? Which is a difficult train of thought for some adults to go down. So how do you begin discussing it with children? How do you kind of broach that and get them to question that?
Well, I would never raise the question.
No.
Because I don't think that's the right way round. But if asked, then again I would say, well, we have only one life. That's my view, and obviously as a humanist, or that's what humanists think. We have only one life, and we need to make the best we can of this life. And as far as I'm concerned, the purpose of my life is to minimise the amount of harm we do, the people around me, people I can influence in the world, minimise the harm we do, maximise the good we do, and live a good and fulfilled and fulfilling life, myself and for those around me. That is my answer.
That's your purpose.
And I would get children to think about it from that point of view. You know, why is there a need to have something outside? And if you do believe in an afterlife, what does that do to this life? How does that change how you live this life? I mean, one of the things that really upset me when I started to think about the religious part of my upbringing was doing good or not doing harm because of the fear of punishment after death, and I think that is wrong.
Yeah,
I don't think that's healthy. Or punishment here and now. It's much better to do what you do because you believe that what you're doing is good for other people.
We in the podcast that Anne mentioned at the beginning of this, in one of the previous ones, we had a poem from a local performance poet, and there was a line in that really stuck with me. It was, "A child who only does good things when promised sweets is not necessarily a well-behaved child." That's obviously not the exact quote. I can't quite remember what it is. Yeah. But I think that's always what I think of whenever talking about the idea of morality in relation to an afterlife. It's not necessarily.
No.
It's not necessarily.
It's not sustaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's living a good life, doing good things because you want the world to be a better place is something that is kind of much easier to reconcile in my mind, I think. You've got some really fantastic quotes in here. Obviously there's sections written by other well-known humanists, so there's Stephen Fry, Philip Pullman, Shaki Khorsandi, but also throughout this you've got quotes from almost unexpected people. Like at the beginning there's a quote from Daniel Radcliffe, which I particularly enjoyed.
That's right.
How did you go about finding and putting them together? I imagine it must have been quite fun.
That was
exercise.
fun. I enjoyed that. I did that bit. I particularly enjoyed doing that. I just I use the internet an awful lot, and people were suggesting, that the Humanist Association website, of course, has some people in it as well. And Daniel Radcliffe, I forget, somebody must have mentioned that he was a humanist. So, yeah, I mean, and one of the things he says, I do like this quote, I have a problem with religion or anything that says we have all the answers, because there's no such thing as the answers. We're complex, we change our minds on issues all the time, and he doesn't think that religion leaves room for human complexity. So I thought that was a good one. So yes, I found these quotes in all sorts of places. And my favourite, if I could.
I was going to ask if you had a favourite.
Yes, I hadn't known this woman existed. Madeleine Murray O'Hair, 1919 to 1955, an American writer and activist. And she said, an atheist believes that a hospital should be built instead of a church, that deed must be done instead of prayer said. An atheist strives for involvement in life and not escape into death. An atheist, or humanist in this case, wants disease conquered, poverty vanished, war eliminated. So no pressure there. But that's talking about the here and now. Yeah,
stick it on the to-do list.
Stick it on the to-do list.
Fine. That's one of the things that I find interesting about that quote in particular is obviously it starts off with building a hospital instead of a church. Mm-hmm. When you're writing something like this, which is encouraging children to question things and to continue to think for themselves, sometimes when you do have your own beliefs and your own views, I imagine must be quite difficult to stop yourself from writing in absolutes. So for that quote, building a hospital instead of a church, it could be quite easy to say you should build a hospital instead of a church.
Yeah.
Whereas
I actually don't find it difficult not to write in absolutes, because what goes through this and all the writing that we do is this questioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that is, I mean, so we don't actually refer to that quote, but it's there, and it's there for people to discuss. And, of course you could discuss quite easily each of those with people who are religious, and in some cases there might be a discussion between someone who is religious, who believes that a church in this particular instance would be a better thing to do than to build a hospital. But if you have a discussion about it and you argue about why, in each case, what good comes out of either of them, then as far as I'm concerned, that's the job. Mm-hmm. The job is to question, and for children to question. So I would not write absolutes. No. I don't, and I don't believe that that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. That's not how to get children to think for themselves.
Mm-hmm. You've been very used to kind of questioning everything that you've thought or put out for quite some time, I suppose. So it's almost second nature in many ways to continue with this.
I mean, it's not to say that when I talk to children, I don't. They don't know what I think about things, because they will do. But with refugees, for example. But yes, the thing is to raise questions.
Okay. So as I said earlier, the questions throughout I thought were a really nice touch, and at the end I feel like it kind of culminates with the charter at the back. So right at the end of this book, children are encouraged to sit down and write their own personal charter for their values and how they'd like to live their lives, which I think is kind of quite a nice prompt for the inclusion of this book in classrooms.
Absolutely.
It's a nice exercise that a teacher can do with their class, and can also then perhaps refer back to later on and see how their views change. Is that kind of how you see it fitting in with classrooms? Is there anything else that you kind of like to see as this goes into schools?
I mean, this is not a book that we would expect someone to give a child to read, from beginning to end. It is very much a book that needs to be interacted with, and although the way it's written, it's not a school textbook. We would expect that it would be used, and it could be used in schools over a term. focusing on different elements of it, and you could do it actually, and just in terms of philosophy, really. And the personal charter, again, it's not something that I would recommend be done by an individual on their own. I'd recommend that you get children in a class, for example, or if a parent is doing this with a child and their friends, you can get a group of the friends together and get them discussing these issues, and get them to discuss what are your personal values. So we've got under the self, I value myself as a human being capable of moral, intellectual and spiritual development, and I will strive for knowledge, wisdom and understanding. That we give them that as a starter. They can write their own if they want. I will. So what will you do with that? And then you get them to think about it and talk about it. So group discussions, intense little group discussions in school, and then getting together as a class and sharing what the groups have come up with, I think is the best way of dealing with all of these big issues.
Yeah, it's essentially a philosophy with children.
Yes.
Class, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier about philosophy for children.
Yes.
Again, on the podcast, which I promise I'm not plugging too much, I hope. The most recent episode, we spoke to a professor teaching a course in the University of Strathclyde about teaching philosophy with children, and one of the key things that she mentioned, which I was thinking about as you were talking, is the most important thing that you can do as an adult is stop talking and let the child speak.
Listen.
Kind of let it be led by them, which I imagine would be quite difficult to do at first, but far more valuable, I would think.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely key, and that's really good advice. Listen. Listen to the children. Listen to what they're saying. Help, facilitate, mediate, but listen most of all. And when I started running workshops in schools, I did find it hard at first not to jump in, and direct the discussions. But then I did learn to back off, and you hear the children talking to each other, and if you listen and let them do it, a lot more comes out of it.
There's also in here, there's 3 pages, well, 3 double pages I should say, relating to ceremonies and marking life's big milestones. So there's the wedding and the naming ceremony, which you write about in kind of a reasonable amount of detail, because it was the same couple for both, and they combined the 2 ceremonies into the one day, which I thought was really nice. Could you just tell us a little bit about that and about a humanist ceremony and why it's special?
Why it's special? Yes, I mean this was a gift to us. The 2 people in here, or 3, because there's a third boy as well. Yeah. Julia is an editor at our publishers, and she and her husband now were actually getting married a month after the book was about to go out. No, that's not true. It was before, because we've got the pictures in the book. So when we thought about the ceremonies, what we could have done was to go to a celebrant and say, right, well, how do you do it? But actually, Julia and Jeff had already worked out what they were going to do. They'd sat down with a celebrant from the Humanist Association and written their own wedding ceremony. I mean, apart from the 1 or 2 sentences that are legal. And they have a child, who you can see there, and they wanted the naming ceremony. It all happened at the same time. So they wrote this up themselves, and we thought it was absolutely perfect for the book, because it shows that you can be as joyful as you want to be. You can put in what means something to you as a couple for the wedding, and as a couple with your child as well. So we were delighted with what they had written, and we sort of took extracts from it and put it in here, and it really underlines humanist values, I think. So yeah, that was great. And the funeral.
Yeah, the funeral section was very sad, actually, because for anyone who is not familiar with Michael Rosenori's work, he wrote this section after he lost his son.
Yes, good point.
There's reference to his book, The Sad Book, as well, which is something that he wrote afterwards about dealing with grief and I think depression as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Was that difficult for him to write?
Actually, Michael talks about it quite a lot now, and he talks about it because for him it helps him to process the whole thing. I mean, his son died over 20 years ago, I think, and it still seems just as recent. But he wrote the book to help process it, but also because he believes that it's a good thing to do to share how different people deal with difficult issues, difficult personal issues, and death, of course, is probably the biggest of them. So, again, this just shows how one person has dealt with a funeral, but it's more than a funeral; it's the whole process. And again, that was because it was Michael as well. It was really good to have that in the book.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to have a section like this because, like you say, it's one of the more difficult subjects you can tackle, but it's also one of the most important because, I mean, it's still very oddly a taboo in many ways for us to actually talk about death and about, what people might want after they die. It's still kind of seen as something that we don't really do that much in this society, which is actually really very harmful. So I think the way that he's kind of really opened up about it and, written about the process and what they did, and again having the question there of think about how would you like to be remembered, is just it's a nice, not difficult way to kind of begin that sort of thought process and introducing it as not a scary thing, but something that we do all need to think about at some point. Just to finish off my bit before I open it up to you lovely people, what do you have going on next? Because I know that you've mentioned the refugees.
Refugees and Diaries. Yes, and also I have got. Can I put a plug in here?
Yes,
I have got a book coming out with my husband Anthony Robinson, called Young Palestinians Speak, Living Under Occupation. So that's another very big one. And that's aimed at 10 to 15-year-olds.
When's that coming out?
That's coming out in January, February, but it's a US publisher who's publishing it. It will be published in this country in the first 6 months, probably next year. So, lots of big issues.
Okay. Can I just ask, is it a challenge kind of getting these sort of big issue books out there into the world? Because I imagine they can be a bit daunting for some publishers to kind of take on.
Yes. We were really delighted when Wayland took this on, and the Refugees and Diaries book as well, but it was very topical, obviously. We put it to them. It came out very quickly as well. It's obviously very topical, and they believe that it's important. And this new book they're very keen to do. Our refugee diary books came out first in 2008 to 2010, and we are trying to republish them now. We haven't so far succeeded in getting another publisher to take them on, so we're doing it sort of ourselves through a website. So yes, it's hard. And the newest book that Anthony and I are doing, we found this publisher who's recommended to us by a wonderful Palestinian author called Raja Shahade, who's brilliant. So it's not easy. But once they're out there, people do respond.
Yeah.
We've had lots of very positive responses.
Well, that's good. And much like this, it's hard, but it's very, very important, of course, to actually get those subjects out there. So
I think so.
Good. Okay, should we take some
questions, please?
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Annemarie?
Thanks for coming along, and thanks for creating such a book. It's definitely for it. You said it's not a school textbook. Did you consult the curriculum for excellence in its religious, moral, and personal content to see if it was a match for the expectations and outcomes that you mentioned?
Yeah, at the very beginning, I did. Yes, we did. We did look at it. I mean, it's sort of in the mists of time now, so I can't remember. Yes, we went through the curriculum. We went through, and I also had a friend who was an advisor who had a look at it also to see if we were the way we were phrasing things worked. So I can't refer to anything now, though. I'm sorry, but we did look at it.
Yes, you.
Hello. Three little questions.
Okay.
I'm involved in visiting schools and regularly come
Visiting.
on behalf of the Humanist Society.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And regularly come across questions. You conflate very happily secularism with humanism. Would you like to differentiate between them in the way that children would understand?
In a way that children would understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they are different. The second is you've not mentioned at all the Amsterdam Accord, which is the credo, if you like, of the humanist movement. And thirdly, when involved in the big question sessions, you're absolutely correct that the why are we here question is very, very important. We dealt very well with what we do with why we are here, but you mentioned nothing about the biological why we are here.
I'm not sure I really follow the drift of that. What do we do without biological?
Are we obliged to pass on the genes which have been passed on to us? Is there an obligation?
Right.
I know it's a very big question, but children actually ask this, and they're not happy unless you begin to answer the biology as well as the.
Okay, I'm not sure that would have made much sense to put that in this 32-page book.
I was going on to say, at what age would you be comfortable in this?
I mean, I think you can talk about that with this age group. No problem at all. You can discuss those things. I don't think that's an issue. I just don't think it was part of what we were trying to do. If it had come up, then we could have put it in as, some people question this. Think about it, certainly. But I wouldn't answer the question anyway, as I said. We raise questions rather than answering.
So the first two parts.
Right. What's the difference between humanism and secularism? What do you say?
Well, secularism is much more aggressively atheist, and we are atheists, but not aggressive. We are much more tolerant of the presence of other faiths.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, I don't belong to the Secularist Society, but as far as I'm concerned, secularism is simply saying that we should not, as a society, be forced to accept other religions and other religious views, that we should be allowed to have our own, whether they are religious or not. That's what I understand.
Quite often when we discuss secularism, it's simply with regards to religion not having an influence in law and governance of the country.
Yeah.
Whereas humanism is very much our own moral outlook, and whether we will want to consider ourselves a humanist. Yes. So kind of, I think, in the same way as you can decide your own purpose for being here, you can decide for yourself whether you are a humanist or not. So that's, for me, that would be my definition.
You said you're trying to get the book to every primary school in the UK. I mean, I've been through 2 Catholic schools. So sort of whether you think Catholic schools would accept them into their libraries?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope. Actually, I would hope that most Catholic schools these days would be open-minded enough to accept this book. Because it really isn't dangerous. Well, it is dangerous. It's dangerous because it encourages children to question. But that's the only way it's dangerous. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a humanist myself, so you're preaching to the converted, and I've seen the book. I very much like it. I like to talk about humanism to my friends, and there's currently a debate that I keep losing. And that debate is that a lot of my family are polytheists, believe in reincarnation.
Okay.
And I'm saying, well, it's for the one life we live. Well, they asked me, where's the scientific evidence for one life? And having looked into this, there is no scientific evidence for one life. So why can't we say we should be good and moral people for the life that we live?
Fine. Why not? I mean, the evidence. Yeah, there is no evidence to say there isn't, or there is. I'm not sure I follow.
There's no
what you're
evidence
saying.
for one life or
multiple lives.
Or even reality itself. 70% of this universe is dark matter. Stephen Hawking would say that this is all zeros and ones, or Professor Jim Al-Khalili would probably agree with me. We have no evidence for one life, and I don't believe that's right to teach to children if it's not scientifically correct.
Okay. Right.
Pushing aside the existential crisis.
Putting aside the
which comes from that.
But
If
you
you-
need to teach people that you can ask the questions what they think, which is a better.
But if the model of humanism is for the one life we live, and then immediately
I
because
see,
of the
yeah.
barrier when I'm challenging people, I don't think that's productive, and that's on a lot of the BHA literature.
Yeah,
I've seen.
I have to say, we didn't write this book for the Humanist Association, and what we've written in here. I mean, we've had a lot of obviously support, but this isn't. And people in here say we have one life, but that's every individual's opinion.
Every
So
consciousness, you could say.
every conscious, you could.
Because if
But-
you do have multiple lives, you wouldn't necessarily be you in them. You could argue it that way. Solve that.
Possible.
Right, anybody else? No? Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Can I just ask one thing actually before we... Are there any teachers here who... Right, and people who would like to... Okay, because I was going to say, when we were talking earlier about, how you get this sort of thing going. As I say, I run workshops on the refugee diaries. I use an Amnesty... We use as the basis of it an Amnesty International role play called Time to Flee, which sets up a scenario, and it's fantastic for getting children thinking. So with this, I haven't actually done this myself, but what I would recommend, for example, for talking about moral values and where they come from, and again, this is not necessarily trying to push anything, it's setting up the situation. For example, you can do this with younger children on, when is it okay? Is it ever okay to lie? And when might it be okay to lie? But so you can set up a situation where it will relate to something to do with the children that you're working with. And you could also set up a situation where there's something going on, some conflict going on in the community. It might be the school, it might be the community around the school. And you can set up situations there where, again, you get the children talking and thinking about these specific situations. And that is, I find, a really effective way of getting children to engage with big questions.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Humanity Podcast. We hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Please do let us know if there's anything that you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Make sure to give us a rating to let us know how we're doing and help us improve. And please do share and subscribe. We'll see you next month for the next episode. Bye for now.